Improvise, organize, customize, Formulize. Formulize is open source software that I work with a bunch of clients. Formulize does forms, workflows, and reporting. It is 100% free and open source. What that means in practice, PHP, MySQL, and it's licensed under GPL2 because it's old. So this is like a blast from the past in that sense. Imagine, if you will, a content management system. Everybody knows what content management systems are, right? Imagine a content management system.
I don't know what's a content management system.
Oh, well, I'm talking about WordPress or commercial ones like Squarespace or stuff like that. So imagine a content management system, one of those kind of things where it lets you make something that you could code, but you make it instead a different way. Well, imagine a content management system, but for databases, not for websites. So imagine configuring your database instead of programming it. Imagine quickly reconfiguring your database. This is the big deal part. When processes change, because you have a database that helps you run some process, and then departments are reorganized, something changes, new things happen, and all of a sudden the way you used to do things isn't quite the way you do things now, and you've got to adjust stuff. Requirements might change, the government might impose new things on you, or suppliers, or whatever it is, certain requirements change, and all of a sudden the things that you worked hard on might not be quite right anymore. Or this is my favorite, clients change their mind. Did you know that about clients? Who works with clients? And they all know exactly what they need when you first talk to them about a project, don't they? They never learn anything new about what they really need during the course of a project. Of course, that happens all the time. Easily integrate new processes with your existing data. So if you built out something, and then it's like, hey, we need this new thing, and like half or more of what it needs to draw on data-wise, we already have in this system over here. So why don't we just like extend that instead of buying a new app and trying to integrate these things and so on. And it ensures consistency because everything is in the same system. It's one platform to model all of the data and all the connections between it. And that means, like, I work with dozens of systems, a variety of different clients. They're all the same. If I had to master like 12 wildly different applications and code bases going back years for all these different, like I'd need to be multiple people. But I can do this myself because it's actually one code base. So what is Formulize used for? All kinds of different things. Activity logging, inventory, time tracking, travel booking itineraries, case management, like notes and meeting histories for clients, contact management or CRM type stuff, complex content management. I mean, if you just need a blog, install WordPress, etc. But if you have complex content management where you essentially need a database to manage the stuff and then you want to pull out different perspectives on that into your website, it's good for that kind of thing. Surveys, questionnaires, sign-ups, booking systems, expense tracking and claims, assessments, intake management, matchmaking and assignments. The Faculty of Architecture at U of T uses it to assign professors to courses, for example. Monash University in Australia is doing matching of social work students to placements. Tracking professional development credits. This is a fun one. Any professional engineers here or other professionals? So professions often have, for those of you who don't know, they have to take so many courses during a year, like these professional development activities. You have to do a certain number to keep your registration. And there's different rules about that, and it can get kind of persnickety. And that's actually something that one group has used Formulize for, keeping track of who's got how many credits. Basically, any customer unique workflow. So you can tell these because there's lots of email and spreadsheets because it's like some unique thing that only your organization does or people think only their organization does. And there's no exact off-the-shelf software that fits. That's where Formulize is really, really good. And many more things like laundry detergent. It is both new and improved. So I will briefly situate you about what I'm going to show you, actually building an application. I'm going to show you start to finish a Formulize application in 19 minutes. It's pre-recorded, don't worry. But to understand what you're seeing, because it's so sped up, there isn't time to explain it as we go. So I'll explain a little bit of it now. So a museum database with a curator with 2 R's. Oh my. It got in there in the original setup, and so if you look closely, as it zips by in the login screen, there's 2 R's. It's just, sorry. So a museum might have a curator and people in departments. So this is like the user structure. And this museum covers all the bases. They have an ancient history department and a modern history department. So they got everything. And in their database, they might want to start out by tracking artifacts. All museums need to track their artifacts. They might tie that to collections. You know, collections have many artifacts in them. And then they might say, oh, well, it would be good. We have all this data about our artifacts. We do these exhibits. It would be good to record what artifacts have been in which exhibits, or like what we want to do for planning an exhibit and so on. And then maybe we should survey people who see the exhibits, and you do public outreach. So conceptually, there's 4 things that would make a moderately interesting application. So with that, here's a Formulize installation. We will log in. We will go to the admin side, like a content management system. You got the front side and the admin side. And we will make a form. And we'll call that form artifacts. And we'll put a bunch of questions into the form. Starting with, of course, an ID number. If you know anything about databases, I'm sure everybody in here knows about databases and primary keys. So you're going to want some core identifier for your artifacts. And then we will just zip through stuff after this. So we'll have a short name, probably a full description, and a bunch of other things. Like who knows what it could be, right? It could be lots and lots of things. I put in height, width, and depth here. I'm not sure that museums actually record the height, width, and depth in centimeters for everything in their collection, but I do, because that just makes so much sense. So we got the year as well, and the era, is it BCE or CE, and so on. So we make up a little form. Then we set some permissions on the form. This is a core part of Formulize, is the permissions. Now we'll just do basic things for registered users, i.e. everybody who has an account to access the system. They can create entries, update entries, delete entries, and they can view entries by everyone in all groups. There's no restrictions there. So we get a list of our artifacts. There's none yet, but we'll create some artifacts. This is the form that we just made. We have a very lovely Roman coin. Fill in the form. There we go. We'll just zip through and make a few more things, just so we have some data to work with. Yeah, everything from a coin to a full chariot, and a spoon. So we've got some data. We've entered all of that. There's 5 bits of data in our little artifacts database, like a table. At this point, it's not much different than a spreadsheet. But there is some basic interface stuff like searching and sorting and other good stuff built into Formulize. So all that stuff is available with any set of data, any form, any structure, including multi-form sets of information that you'll see later. So you can do, number searching greater than this. There's also date searching. We don't have any dates active right now. And the whole interface here is all additive. You notice the sort is still active on the ID number, and these searches are still active. Like everything stays the same until you reset it or until you reload the page. And you can also actually save those for reference later, which we'll look at in a minute. So we want to make some other things as well. We'll make some other artifacts. These ones are actually a little newer, just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now we have 10 things in our database. And this will let us look at, you can edit things, of course, forgot the 0. So, artifacts, wonderful. But now, what about the collections? If you remember, we got the artifacts and we got the collections. Well, actually, first of all, before I get to the collections, what we've got is we can define some of the defaults for the screens. We can define lots of things. I mean, all through this, I'm really only giving you a bit of a taste, because there's lots of stuff that you just couldn't possibly show, even sped up like this. But if we imagine the year of origin, the year and the era are two different fields. The number of the year and the BCE or CE. And if we want that in a single column, we can do derived values like this that will concatenate those things. And then this is actually a separate field in the database based on the other ones. And that's actually full PHP code. If you notice, it's like open PHP there. So you can actually do whatever you want code-wise at certain points in the system if you need that kind of flexibility. So collections are very simple in this model. We're just going to have the name for the collection to distinguish them from each other. And we will have the artifacts that are part of the collection. This is where it starts to get interesting, because we have a connection between the collections and the artifacts. So within the collection, we're going to say, we're going to have this list of artifacts. It's going to be based on the artifacts in the artifacts form. We want to see the ID number and the short name as the way of distinguishing these and reading them. And we're going to make it an auto-completion box where we can have multiple selections. So what does that end up looking like? So we could have the ancient collection, and we can add in all of our ancient things. And so there it's concatenated the ID and the short description, and lets you, search through what might be thousands and thousands of things. And add that stuff up. You can, you can reuse this stuff, of course, to make an interesting database. You'd have multiple, variations on things and perspectives, different ways that things are included. So, we put the weapons together and the coins and the ancient and the modern and so on. Some other things then that are relevant. What are we doing next? Oh yes, setting the permissions. So setting some variable permissions, because in this museum, maybe, and this is where it gets interesting, because of course everybody's situation is a bit different, and that's why being able to model a wide variety of things is important. But what we might want is, say, for the ancient history people, to only be able to update their group and delete things in their group and view entries that belong to their group, but not the other folks. Maybe you got some huge museum with lots and lots of stuff, and you don't want them being sort of distracted and their interfaces cluttered up by everything else. So you're gonna zero in on just their information, and then the 2R curator gets to see everything. So you can set up the permissions in different ways for different people, depending on what your workflow is. And if we set this so that it's actually owned by the ancient folks, and that this one is owned by the modern folks, then when we go out and come back in, it's kind of predictable, but I just wanted to go through and show actual working software, not just hand waving. So there, that one logs in. They only see, there's 4 things in there because we made 4 things, but these folks are only seeing this stuff. And that's basically the essential principle of Formulize through and through, is that the behavior of the application is 100% determined by the context of who's logged in and what the configurations are that have been applied to them and their groups and to the forms and so on. So if we extend this to include exhibits, then what can we do there? It's similar to the collections, but I will pause because we're going to get to the most complicated part of the configuration that I think bears just a little bit of a pre-explanation, because I know it's a lot to digest at all anyway, let alone this part. So here's the idea for exhibits. This is a preview of the exhibit form that's being built and that we want to have. It's very simple. You got a name for the exhibit. You've got a collection that the exhibit draws from. and then you're going to have artifacts that are part of the exhibit. And the key idea that I wanted to play with here as an example is each exhibit draws from one collection, and so only the artifacts in that collection will be available. So it's like it's a truly dynamic filter, because you change this and the filtering rules for this element change. You know, like a province city drop down, those kind of collected things. But you can do all of that just through the configuration. So similarly, if you pick a different collection, like the coin collection, then you're only going to get the coins. That's the idea that we're aiming for. And so this is how it comes together. So we got the name. And then we add the collection. So we link to the collections, so we can have a list of collections. And we'll link to the artifacts, so we can have a list of artifacts. But by default, that would just be a link to the entire artifacts list, which is not what we want. So again, we'll just limit it to the IDs and the short names, like we did before. And then we get to the key part. If the options are linked, then we're going to limit them to the values that are selected in. Basically, for each collection, there's that defined set of which artifacts are in the collection. That's already been made in the other form, and it's been filled in. So we want to say, for whatever collection is selected in this form, use that as the filter. So we're just going to finish typing that part in. There we go. And should have sped that part up. Anyway. Oh yeah, and we make it dependent. You can do conditional elements all over the place. That's very common, of course. So we don't want to see the artifacts until there's a collection selected. So if the collection is not blank, show the artifacts list. And by the way, filter it according to whatever collection somebody chose. And we'll just set some basic permissions. We already talked about those. OK, how does it come together? So there you go. The ancient history, and drawing from the ancient collection, and there's some things that we're going to include from the ancient collection in there. Now, in this case, one other change I wanted to make, because that was all the collections were available, but actually just want, if they're linked, we only want the collections that are available to the person. So like the ancient people should only be drawing from the ancient collections to parallel the permissions that we had in the other part of the system. So it's just putting in that restriction. And so now, there we go. Now it's just the ancient collection is the only one that they can draw from, and it'll filter the artifacts list based on that. Same thing for the modern one. It can only pick the modern collection, and the artifacts are just the modern ones. So you can get that. That's like one way in which whatever workflows you might be needing can be modeled. And then the curator can see everything, but they can also change the scope based on, you can actually zero in on the scope for specific groups, just like it did there, if you have permission to see things from all those groups. Now, one of the core things, having set up a bunch of data in a bunch of forms that have connections, one of the core things you can do in Formulize, of course, is define how these things are connected. And the data querying layer takes all of this into account. So the collections and the artifacts, one-to-many, the exhibits and the artifacts, one-to-many. And the query layer takes all of that into account. If you say, we're working on the artifacts list, we're going to base the artifacts list on that full set of information. And so now, instead of just using artifacts columns in this list, we can draw any column from any of the other forms. So there it is, with the artifacts info and the column names and the exhibit names in the artifacts list, because the relationship's been defined and it just pulls everything in. And all the same searching and sorting and all the other operations work based on that. And based on whatever configuration of forms you've defined in your relationship, however many forms you have that are many to one, or one to one, or lots of different things. There's the collections with drawing in names from the artifacts. So some other basic things that you can do that are useful for some people in different situations. We can do basic calculations, like a percentage breakdown of the errors. How many are BCE and how many are CE? It's 60-40. And you can do that from the collections list or the artifacts list. This is on the collections list. The first time it was on the artifacts list. But it's the same, it's running the same operation regardless. And we can group it based on whatever property. That's the thing, because the relationship knows all of the fields in all of the forms. So we can just group by the collection name, whether we're on the collection list or the artifacts list, because all of that data is available because of the defined relationship. You can save the views as well. Anything that you've done, you can save it. Like, for example, we might save this as the error breakdown report. So it's now saved as a quick view that people can come back to without having to create it, go through all these clicks. Yeah, and that's true not just for the calculations, but if you do a search, like we look for things that are over 100 centimeters, well, we can save that, and we can call that taller than a meter. Save that, and there you go. And those things are published out. So if we come in as another user, they can come in and they can see the taller than a meter. There you go. Like, so you can push things out to other folks. And that's not the same. I should run it back just a second, because that is something that I wanted to emphasize. If I can just zoom forward just a little bit. There we go. 5 things in CE. If you recall, I know there's a million things on the screen, but when this was created by the curator, it was like 60-40 or whatever it was, 6 and 1. Like this is a different number, but it's the same report. Why is that? Because this person has access to different data because of the permissions. So again, like the reports take into account who is logged in and what are their permissions and what's all the configuration rules, and gives you the right data for them, rather than just what it was originally saved with, if there's a difference. Oh yes, and are we adding in? Yes, you can also, as far as those filtering, like special configuration rules, you can actually, in the permission system, put particular filters onto people. So this says the full description has to contain the word preserved. It's kind of a weird restriction, but just as an example, you can actually put those kind of really specific dynamic rules right into the permissions. And so this is the only entry in the database that uses the word preserved in the description. So when this person logs in, that's all they see. And that rule carries through because it's part of the permissions to all the reports and all the other behaviors everywhere else. You can inject some code into different places. There's events that we handle, like before save events and after save and so on. There is actually a whole server-side API. There's a way of extracting data to other sources as well. There's one organization I work with that does a lot of Google integration with Formulize. But this one is just a quick, I'll just pause that. This is a quick little snippet that says, make sure there's an M at the front of all the ID numbers, because maybe it's the convention and format that they all need to start with M. So it's basically saying, if there's no M at the front, put an M on the front. So you just add that as a before save operation, and then whenever any data is saved in that form, if we take off the M comes back, so it just works. So you can do things like that for data integrity, or also for fancy rules. If certain things get submitted and then you want a bunch of other things to happen, that's totally fine. You can define lots of different versions of every screen. We've just had this simple little form of the artifacts, but suppose you have a big form and you want to divide it up into multiple pages. You can just make a different variation on the screen and keep adding pages and then decide how you want them to look. Same as how you can reconfigure how the lists look and behave. So, and it's actually, there's a whole templating side of things too. If you want to customize the look completely and do your own templates or themes, that's possible too, but time is limited. So if we go to the artifacts now, there are 2 pages. We have the dimensions on the dimensions tab. We got everything else on the first tab. And also, the default theme and look is fully mobile friendly. Now, big tables of data aren't mobile friendly by definition, but I think we do an OK job. Like, that's a functional Formulize list, exactly the same as it always is. And when you go into the form, here's the 2 tabs, dimension and names. And that all works too. So there are, of course, certain workflows where mobile entry is really important. So I'm really glad that that's fully supported. Lastly, public stuff. Suppose you want surveys. People see the exhibits. You want them to give you feedback. So you can make a quick little form. What did you see? What did you like about it? Which artifact was your favorite artifact? We do a lot of the same filtering here to limit the list of artifacts based on the collection that they saw, and so on and so on. Set permissions for people to read the entries, but only anonymous users, people who aren't logged in, can create entries in this case. And by default, anonymous people actually have no access to anything. Even if you've given them permission, you have to give them like extra permission. But we're just giving them the OK for this one page, this one survey form. And we want it to be accessible at a plain URL /survey. So there we go. So which collection did you see? Which artifact from that collection? Or rather from that exhibit. It's not all the artifacts in the collection. It's only the artifacts that were present in that particular exhibit are showing up. Make a couple more. Tom Jones came, liked the sword. And you'll notice when it reloads, they can't edit it. That's optional, because Captain Cook picked up a Polynesian canoe. Or liked a Polynesian canoe. Probably picked up a few too. It's configurable whether you want it to be editable or not, but we didn't turn that on for them. Lastly, notifications. Staff logs in, they can see all the survey feedback. Maybe they want to be notified. Maybe they want to be notified only when an entry is from their exhibit, so they can put a filter on that. And very lastly, export to spreadsheets, as you might imagine, works the way you think it would. There's also import from spreadsheets as well possible. And there's API stuff. Like I said, there's a spreadsheet. There's the data. Very straightforward. And that's it. There you go. So thank you. Thank you. Briefly then, Formulize. Hope you liked what you saw and found it intriguing. You can find out more at formulize.org. You can find me there, apparently, trying that out to see where that goes. Good old Twitter. Good old email, if you're that old school. Slack is good. If you go to formulize.org, there's a Join Us on Slack button. Slack is very good. If you search Formulize database on Google, the first 5 are all things about Formulize that I've put together. So it's easy to find. And we're very interested and open to people using it for whatever. And it's as open source from a community perspective. Any questions? I'll answer questions till the end of time. If you want to know how do I set up such and such a thing? Because that's kind of complicated. I know it's kind of complicated. So how do I set up such and such a thing? I will tell you. Ask me. I will tell you. Other people can help as well. So if you're interested, you have anything that might be useful, or you want to know how it might integrate with something you're doing, let's talk. It's open source. Thank you very much.